Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
Welcome to the Gone to the Dogs podcast. This is your host, Steve Fielder, coming to you one more time from the swamps down here in the sunny state of Florida. We never talk about the weather on this show, so I won't tell you that it's going to be about 95 degrees and humidity. It will probably equal that. We've got a great guest today for you, somebody that I've known since my first days in Raleigh, North Carolina, with the AKC. I knew this guy through his exploits around the country in the magazines before we actually met. So we're going to have a great time and a great conversation today with my guest, Mr. Courtney Risk. But before we bring Courtney on, I wanted to mention a few news items that are floating around out there in the coonhound world. The big news, I think, for everybody is the changes that the PKC organization has made to their world hunt. Now, I believe these changes, I kind of surf around the internet from time to time, too much time, according to my wife. But at any rate, it was Josh Michaelis, I believe, that has the Fuel by Joy podcast that suggested online what was pretty much this change, except for what are the regions or the zone hunts that they're going to use. But at any rate, what PKC has decided to do is have some zone hunts, similar to what UKC does with their World Championship. And of course, looking back, I was at UKC when we decided to go to the zone format to give more people around the country a chance to compete in the World Championship. So without going through all the locations and regions and everything, all of this has been well publicized on the PKC website, prohound.com. It's also on Facebook. If you check Shane Patton, he's the guy that took Jerry Mall's place and is running the coonhound department there at PKC. He's posted all the details. But just in a nutshell, there will be these zone hunts, and if you go, they're 2-night affairs, and you go out and win back-to-back casts either on Friday night or Saturday night, will qualify you to advance straight to the semifinal round at the World Championship in Salem, Illinois. But if you want to go old school and do it the way you've always done it, you can still show up at the beginning of the week at Salem and try to put your 2 cast wins together back-to-back on Monday through Thursday nights. So basically what this is, it allows a guy out there in the fruited plain to go to a zone hunt fairly close to him and enter the dog. And if he's successful with 2 cast wins back-to-back, there's a $300 entry, and then you can re-enter on Saturday night if you're not successful on Friday. So anyway, just go to prohound.com, look up those changes, and there's some chatter out there in the social media about whether this is a good thing or bad thing. But from my observation, it seems that most people are in favor of the change. Another big news item that came to my attention just recently is the 2021 UKC Tournament of Champions winning dog, Conor McGregor, owned by J.R. Gray, has been sold. Austin Gentry of Hamilton, Alabama, I believe is the guy that will be handling Connor. Billy Wolf from Whitesboro, Texas. They're the owners, and we want to wish them the best of success. I guess JR's thinking, with the Willie dog that he has been so successful in the stud pen, and I'm sure there's a lot of young stuff coming on. We had JR on the podcast here about 3 weeks or so ago. But anyway, want to wish the new owners of Conor McGregor a great run with what's obviously a real nice coonhound. I also want to welcome into the world of podcasting Alan Gingrich and Trevor Wade at UKC, who have just begun their UKC Hunting Ops podcast. There's been 2 episodes posted so far. The first one was on rules and proposed rule changes, and the second one on the youth programs at UKC. So welcome to the media, Alan and Trevor, and we look forward to listening to your podcast. Well, that's all the news that I have for today, but I want to get right into introducing our guest to you. Man, I've had some great times with this guy, some crazy times that we'll talk about, I'm sure. But at any rate, it's just my extreme pleasure to have my buddy Courtney Risk on the show today. How are you doing, Courtney?
Absolutely great, Steve. I really appreciate this opportunity. Can't fathom why you'd want to talk to me, but I'm looking forward to this little opportunity.
Well, I couldn't find anybody else to come on this week. No. That is absolutely not true. And I've thought about for a long time having you on. You know, as I was thinking about this podcast today, I was thinking, I ought to rename this thing instead of Gone to the Dogs, rename it Fielder and Friends, because when I get to have my friends on the podcast, I've had Nubbin Moore on here a couple of times. I've had my good buddy Lee Currens, various ones, and just had a guy that you and I both know. In fact, you were one of the guys that was influential in having me contact Mark Miller about this plot project that we have. But at any rate, Court, it's super, super good to have you on board. And, I first started following you in the reports in the magazines when you were in the military. And I think that was my first recognition of you as a coon hunter, et cetera. But before we get into that and how we got together and everything, tell me a little bit about where you were born and grew up and some of the family stuff. You've got a great family, and just kind of share a little bit of that with our listeners.
Absolutely. Born in Columbus, Nebraska. Dad was from Nebraska. Mom was from Iowa. And spent the first 5 years of my life out in Nebraska, right around the Columbus area. My grandfather was a engineer, had his own electronic business, and was very successful in employing, a lot of people in the Columbus area. And then my dad wanted to kind of make it on his own, and parents moved out to California, to the LA area. And, unfortunately, the marriage didn't last very long, and parents got divorced at 7. So I was raised by my mom, 3 boys, single mother, and moved to Huntington Beach, California. So Huntington Beach, California, the surf capital of the world, growing up there in my teenage years. And believe it or not, it was a little rough, if anybody follows the MMA world, they know Tito Ortiz, the Huntington Beach bad boy. It was a rough area. And so, you can say Courtney started getting himself in a little bit of trouble and started probably running with the wrong crowd in my early teens. And so mom's like, no, this isn't a good idea. It's time to move back to where family's at. And that was back in Iowa.
Well, I see where you get this. I know that you're an LA Angel fan, a Halo fan.
Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. No, it'll always be the California Angels in my mind.
I got you. Well, we kind of became a little bit of Angel fans here in Florida as we followed Joe Madden, who was a manager of the Tampa Bay Rays, and he moved to Chicago. And, of course, my son lives up there, so kind of followed him to Chicago and then over to L.A., but unfortunately, Joe has come upon what happens, I guess, with a lot of major league managers. He recently got fired by the Angels. So, but anyway, yeah, I knew that you were an Angel fan. So, all right. So you then from Southern California, you went to Iowa then, right?
Went to Iowa. So you can imagine this long-haired surfing boy, wearing 6-wax T-shirt, bell-bottoms, flip-flops, puka shells, in Dinsdale, Iowa.
You were like a dude. Like, totally, man.
and Dinsdale, Iowa, population 49.
Ooh.
So
culture shock.
Yeah, ultra shock. Cornfield, soybean. My grandfather had a big 800-acre farm there, and it was all aunts and cousins and that lived in the area, which made up the small little town of Dinsdale, Iowa. And so I had a very good family influence. But when I started going to school, I just didn't fit in. And so I was in that culture shock, and an 8th grade teacher gave me a book, Where the Red Fern Grows.
Oh, there it is.
And that started so, it transitioned me from, BMX bikes and surfing and the California lifestyle to more of a country boy and getting, comfortable in my new environment, gave me, something to do. And like Billy Coleman, I started living and breathing coon hounds. And so I talked to my uncle, and we decided, Billy Coleman, took out a magazine, Outdoor Life type, and found a coonhound kennel in Tennessee. So could I. And so we ordered, back then a black and tan. I thought that was the breed that I wanted to start with. I just thought they were cool looking. Didn't know anything about them, but it just kind of fancied me. And ordered a dog, and I don't think it was a true black and tan, Steve.
Yeah.
It was one of those high tan. It was probably red bone, probably had a little bit of Walker in it, but, it was a high tan meat dog, and we just called him Buck. And, he'd chase just about anything. If it slithered, if it crawled, if it flew, if it ran, it was game on.
And how old were you at that time, Court?
I was 13 at that time.
Okay.
And so me and my uncle, we would drive around, the farms of Iowa, and if something, ran across the road, it was game on. And so we did that for a while, had some fun.
Now, would old Buck tree?
Oh, he would tree.
Yeah.
But, and probably the best kill dog I've ever had. But, we would normally have to find the coon for him and probably squall it down out of the tree. And then once it started running, he would get it and, put it under a corn crib and, pretty much kill anything within first couple chomps. So, but,
yeah. Sounds like a great dog for a kid, though.
Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
And then I started getting some, local boys that started, running dogs. So we would walk down a railroad track, and, we would have a retriever. We would have a beagle. We'd have the coon hound, and, we would have a shotgun. We would have a 22, and, we would just go out and have fun and, be boys. And we would be gone for hours, walking those railroad tracks, cornfields, small little creeks. And, that's kind of how things started.
Yeah, I got you. Well, that's a great way to start. Well, before we go any deeper into the coon hunting, I know that you had a career in the military and that you're still involved with the military. But let's talk a little bit about that. When did that? I'm sure there's so many aspects here I want to talk to you about, Courtney. I know that you were involved in wrestling and other athletics, right?
I was. I started that in California. I can remember watching the 1972 Olympics and Dan Gable, from Waterloo, Iowa. Mom when I grew up just outside of Waterloo, Iowa, about 20 minutes from Waterloo. And so, I can just remember watching Dan Gable and just wanted, that was my hero, still my hero. And, anyway, started wrestling. It was mainly freestyle out in California. Had some, success, but just a little bit. And then when we moved back to Iowa, since I didn't really kind of fit in, I fit in on the wrestling mat and on the football field. So my athletic, ability was recognized right off the get-go. I was never a big guy, but I was fast and, ended up picking up the sports and, whatever it was, I ended up just having an athletic ability it just came easy for me.
Well, that's terrific. And, I was one of these kids who loved all kinds of sports and loved to play them, but was never very good at any of them. But, of course, I was a scrawny kid. I weighed about 135 pounds when I graduated high school, Well,
I graduated at 150, so yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I love football, but, football obviously just didn't have the size. I played both way all 4 years in high school football. Made second team All-State as a cornerback, and scored quite a few touchdowns for my small little team. But wrestling really was my sport, and wrestled all 4 years. I always cut too much weight. So I wrestled 112 my freshman year, 119, 126, 132. But I tried to qualify my senior year once again, but back at a lower weight at 126, and just got myself dehydrated. Went up to an upper weight, felt more comfortable, felt the best I did in the entire 4 years, and had a very successful senior year and ended up winning state. And, which was, a big deal in the state of Iowa. Wrestling's kind of, well known in Iowa, and their accomplishments. So that opened up, college opportunities for me.
Well, and you passed that on to your kids too.
All three boys wrestled in college, and one of the oldest boys started doing a little bit of MMA after that, and they're still involved in the sport, as adults.
That's got to be a good feeling, for sure, to see your kids kind of follow in your footsteps. I just have one son, and he kind of followed the writing aspects of my career.
Chris is his name.
Chris, yes. Uh-huh.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, and he's done very well in the corporate world. He's gone from about 4 different major corporations and now works for the company that does all the supplying, any kind of packaging, any kind of supplying for McDonald's restaurants.
Oh, wow.
Or worldwide, actually, is what he does. But he's always been in the PR aspect of things and involving a lot of writing, a lot of communication and stuff. So, that's kind of been a pleasing thing to me to see that Chris kind of followed along, at least that aspect. He always loves the dog, still does, but never quite got the coon hunting bug like like his dad did.
And neither of my boys, you know.
Right.
Cordell, my youngest, you remember Cordell?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You probably could tell some stories.
Oh
about your little
yeah,
adventure with
Cordell and I got into an adventure or two, and the poor kid. I think that one time was more my fault than it was his for sure. But yeah, great kids, and always enjoyed being around your family, Court. Well, now for the most part of your working life, though, you were in the military. Is that right?
Correct. That is correct.
How did that come about for you?
Well, so after high school, I got recruited to Utah State University. They were a Division I wrestling program, actually very successful one. I think we were ranked 13th in the nation that year. And so I was a good wrestler, Steve, but I wasn't a great wrestler. And when you get to the college level, Division I, you know, being a one-timer, you know, and that's what we say in the, you know, you win state one time, you know, you're a one-timer. Well, you're wrestling against two-timers, three-timers, and four-time state champions, you know, and so, you know, there was kids from all across the country. We had 13 kids from Iowa. We called it the Iowa Pipeline. The assistant coach, Randy Erickson, I believe was his name, was an Iowa State wrestler, alumni, All-American. And so he recruited a lot of the Iowa boys. And anyway, I spent a year out there, you know, kind of got discouraged, redshirting my, you know, because I'd always wrestled varsity. And, but I was very interested in the military. And I was taking Air Force ROTC, and I always knew that's where I was going to end up. I just, you know, always saw myself in a uniform, you know, whether it was going to be Marines, Air Force. My dad was a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot. So there was, you know, definitely a Air Force connection. And so after my first year, I went and actually just went and visited a recruiter, went to the Marine recruiter, talked to them. Everything was going really well with that. But the Air Force was right next door, and the recruiter was never there. And so I kept going on back, and I was actually visiting my dad, who was living in Kimball, Nebraska at the time, which is at the far west end of Nebraska, right on the, you know, Wyoming border, not too far from Cheyenne. And I'd have to go to Cheyenne to see a recruiter. The Air Force guy was never there. Finally, my last visit to, you know, ready to sign the papers for the Marine, the Air Force guy's there. And I go talk to him, told him what I wanted to do. And anyway, long story short, ended up enlisting into the Air Force in 1983. I wanted to go into what they called the delayed, you know, enlistment program, where you can pretty much choose your date. And I wanted to get into after January. This was August of 1983. And he goes, well, what if your country needs you? Are you willing to, you know, serve right now? And I said, yeah, absolutely. As soon as I said that weekend, the Korean jetliner was shot down. And, or, you know, an American jet line by the Koreans, North Koreans, I think, was shot down 1983. Yep. That September. And that next, you know, 2 days later, I was headed down to San Antonio, Texas. So that was the beginning of my Air Force career.
Well, there's certainly some parallels there between you and I, because when I got through college, and this was back in 1969, I immediately got drafted because of Vietnam. And I went down and listened to the Army recruiter tell me how I should be a warrant officer. And I knew that meant flying helicopters. And
Right.
I knew the only place we were flying helicopters at that time was Vietnam, and I knew kind of what the odds were of getting out of that.
I think it was a 2-minute life expectancy, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's about the time you walk out the door and get in the bird. That was about it. So I just walked down the street, not down the street, down the hall, and walked in the Air Force recruiter's office, and I said, I'm drafted. I've got 2 weeks. Do you have an opening for me? And he said, yeah, we've got one for an 80 score in the general field. If you can make that score, we can take care of you. I said, what happens? What kind of jobs are there? And he said, some really good jobs. There's a meteorologist, air traffic control, intelligence. And I said, well, what if I wash out? Well, we also have food service and the military police. So I said, well, that's a pretty broad spectrum there, but surely but anyway, I ended up and it turned out to be a good thing for me. And I did go in under delayed enlistment and got to spend about a month down here in Florida. I had an aunt and uncle that were living down here. So there is some commonality there between the two of us. Well, I think I know this is a coon hunting podcast, and we want to get into the coon hunting aspects as soon as we can. But I think your story is so interesting in that just kind of give us like an overview of your military service and what you did. I know you had some pretty intense jobs and so forth.
Well, I wanted to be a dog handler. That's what my original intention was. And so like most recruiters, you get lied to. It's all about the numbers. So they put me in security police. And I told, I think it was, my dorm chief down in San Antonio that, I wanted to be a dog handler, and I was going to be security police. He says, all you're going to be doing is counting rivets on a B-52 up in North Dakota. And I'm like, what? So anyway, they were actually actively recruiting 2 different jobs. And one was pararescue, the elite, rescue force that the Air Force has, very similar to Navy SEALs. And then SERE. And back in the day, they called it survival instructor. And so SERE, survival, evasion, resistance, escape training. And since I had my coon hunting, loved the woods, loved following, a hound on the creek bottom, that just seemed more my fitting. I love the pararescue aspect, but I wouldn't consider myself a strong enough swimmer to, actually make it through that training. So, I chose SERE and went up to Spokane, Washington, and to the Air Force Survival School. And they basically send all the pilots or air crew members or combat control pararescue men that are high risk of capture through the SERE training. And so we teach them how to survive, how to live off the land, how to provide their own shelter, food, water, substance. And then, if they ever found themselves deep behind enemy lines, how to evade capture. If they ended up getting captured, how to resist enemy exploitation and how to return with honor. And if they ever found that opportunity to escape, we teach them how to do that too. So it's kind of a elite school that not everybody gets to go through. Most people don't want to, but they will always remember it for the rest of their lives. So,
well, what I remember about your training in that regard is you had me tasting what ants tasted like. You said they taste like citrus. And I'll be darned, they did.
Like a lemon drop, like the old lemon drop, lemon head candies. They just had that real strong lemony taste.
Yeah, that's right. Well, okay, let's fast forward then a little bit and tell us about, were you deployed or were you stateside the whole time?
No, I had deployments, but really wasn't until the end of my career. So the first 5 years I spent in Spokane, Washington, and I ended up getting married, became a single dad, raising 3 kids by myself. I then got my first or second duty assignment was in at McCord Air Force Base in Tacoma, Washington. And that's when I met Melina. And once Melina and I started dating, and falling in love, that's when the thought of getting back into the hounds, and now I had a good family life, and that longing for, the chase and having hounds and, started coming back to me. Started off with a beagle, and then once I got the beagle, I realized I can do a big hound, even in base housing. And that's, started doing that back in, I guess it would have been 1990. And ended up getting a Walker hound. This time, I was a little bit smarter. I actually went to, reputable breeder, and come to find out that he had a stud dog, an advertised stud dog, Grand Night champion that I believe that Mr. Keith Durkee talked about when he did the podcast. And his name was Okaw River Dick, direct son of Red Eagle Dick. And so direct son of a world champion, and Dick himself placed 16th in the 86 World Hunt, and 4th in the U.S. Championship, which I believe back then, Steve, was the Grand American. Is that correct?
Well, no, actually, the U.S. Championship was held in usually in North Carolina. It was a hunt that was licensed, if you will, by the ACHA. And the first time I went to the U.S. Championship, it was in Lexington, North Carolina. It was a separate hunt.
Gotcha. So, this dog had some credentials, but he was 10 years old. And so I went back to Illinois and ended up picking him up. And that started my coon hunting adventures all over again.
I see. Now, you and I had a mutual friend, and unfortunately, he's passed.
Mr. Dave Anderson.
Great guy. Yes, David Anderson. Did you meet Dave during those years there? When
I was at McCord, and I was at McCord Air Force Base for 8 years. Dave was living in Cedar Woolley, and so I became, we started up the Washington State Coon Hunters Association, and I became the first bench show and master of hounds for the state of Washington. And actually, Linda Mack came on up. I got it approved by UKC. You were probably at UKC at the time. And to do one apprentice under her, since we were so geographically far away, in order to get things started, instead of somebody from California or Montana or, Utah coming out there, do it one time, did it under Miss Linda Mack, and I got my certification. And then from that point on, I started traveling all over the place doing Master of Hounds and bench show, for the Western states.
I see. When I was at UKC, I was kind of amazed at the number of coonhound people that enjoyed the sport out on the West Coast. I used to talk a lot with the guys down in Southern California and the different ones. If I start naming names, I know I'm going to get in trouble. But I remember especially O.B. Hill out there, O.W. Hill with his red bones.
O.H. Hill.
O.W.
Hill.
Yes.
O.W., the ladies' man.
Yeah, he was quite the dapper fellow.
He would come up to Washington. He would bring his red bones, and oh my gosh, they were to die for. You would just drool looking at those absolutely gorgeous dogs.
Yeah, he brought a female down to the World Show in Crockett, Texas, and Dr. David Birdsell was the judge, and he picked Mr. Hill's Redbone female as world champion. So so that
I remember that.
Yeah, that's great.
So going on back to Dave Anderson, we just we became friends. We were very like-minded. He was bringing some of the better dogs. He was from Minnesota. He knew Rick Emerson, grew up with him, and used to coon hunt. And then he ended up getting a female out of Uplander's Joe that he called Lone Pine Mad Money. And I know that kind of strikes a chord with you, being a Lone Pine dog.
Yeah.
But Uplander's Joe being directly out of Old Clover, Lee Logan's. And so that was my introduction to the clover world, if you will.
Right.
And anyway, Dave and I ended up partnering, years later with Money. And Money was, a very nice dog. Wasn't a great dog, but she was a very nice dog, but probably one of the better reproducing females. Interesting, after I left Tacoma, I went down to Albuquerque, and Dave followed me down to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was working at the Pararescue School as an instructor there, teaching all their rock climbing and mountaineering and high angle rescue. And of all the places, Steve, I still say Albuquerque, New Mexico was one of my favorite places to coon hunt.
That does kind of amaze me. What's the gentleman's name out there? Fred. That was
Fred Moore.
Fred Moore.
Mr. Fred Moore.
Yeah.
Yep. A legend.
He's a legend in that area. And I'm not sure. I think my former partner, Chris Powell, and that group there with Seth Hall and all with Houndsman XP may have done a podcast, or I think Seth may have gone and hunted with Fred. As far as you know, is he still living?
Fred is still living. In fact, we just kind of corresponded and liked some stuff on Facebook. Just this, within the last couple of days.
Oh, well, that's awesome. Yes. That's awesome. Yep. Well, I had a connection to Albuquerque through bear hunting. I sold a couple of pups to a guy named Tom David, who operates Summit Outfitters out of, I think he's in Bosque Farms now. Is that the right pronunciation?
And Bosque Farms is where we used to have some of the hunts at Rick Larrabee's place. And then we moved it to other places, Bosque. We basically called the river bottom, or it's known as the Bosque. And so you got Bosque Farms, Los Lunas, Berlin, and, the Rio Grande River. You would be able to basically get a key, unlock the gate, open, drive through, lock it back up, and then you would have miles of driving, paralleling. The road would just parallel the river, and then you would have about 200, yards, maybe a little bit, wider in some spots, of cottonwood forest with Russian olives. And the coons love those little, Russian olives. And, they would only be 15, 20 feet high up in the tree, and talk about training some young dogs. You could get them really fired up with a coon, in a small little tree like that.
Well, I hunted in Russian olives out there along the Bighorn River with Dean Carroll in Wyoming.
Yep.
Those things are very brittle. They're very bushy. It's hard for a dog to get a place to tree on the tree because of all the limbs and everything that are there. And it's just kind of a jungle, like a canopy of those darn things.
It can be.
Yeah, it's.
But the beauty of driving down the road, getting parallel to where the dogs were, walking into the dogs, you can road them, you could rig them, you can cast them. It was just a great place to hunt. It really was. Miss it,
Yeah.
other than, when they had, certain places in the summer that were, fire danger area, they would shut down the entire thing. Other than that, it was a, really good place and some good people.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. And when I went to West Texas around San Angelo, I met some great people. A lot of them were transplants, from other states back east. One guy particularly from Tennessee. But we hunted along the Concho River and different creeks there with a lot of mesquite, and then we'd have some cottonwoods, along the creek bottoms and all. But yeah, hunting out west is definitely a different gig for sure.
Right, and I think there's another name that you might recognize, George Hobbs.
Oh, yes.
I haven't thought about George in a long time, but boy, did I learn a lot from George. I mean, he was just a walking encyclopedia when it came to bear and lion hunt.
Let's talk about George just a minute. And I think, unfortunately, George has passed now.
Oh.
He moved to Oklahoma from New Mexico.
Right.
When I was at UKC, Gary Washburn.
Yep, I remember Gary.
Yeah.
I've been actually out to his place.
Yeah. Well, Gary and I kind of met the first time, I think, at the American Heritage Hunt in Texas, where he came over when we started that event there at the rodeo grounds in Hearne, Texas. And we talked, and Gary began writing a big game column for Coonhound Bloodlines magazine. So he invited me out to go bear hunting with him on horseback in New Mexico. And he said, I want you to come out and meet George Hobbs.
Right.
He said, to me, George Hobbs is the last of the old Ben Lilly type bear hunters.
Western cowboy to the extreme.
Yes. And what a jewel of a guy he was.
Yes.
And I've told the story perhaps in my book, but about the day that I flew into Lubbock, Texas, met a friend there named Wade Fikes from Mineral Wells, Texas, who was the driver, picked us up. I had a dog with me on the plane. Our objective was to drive to Arabella, New Mexico, in the Lincoln National Forest there at Capitan Mountain. I don't know if you hunted any of that country.
I sure did.
Yep. So anyway, as we drove from Ruidoso from Roswell toward Ruidoso, got a little wide spot in the road called Hondo. We drove 15 miles north of Hondo on a little twisting hardtop road to a place called Arabella that consisted of 3 dwellings that were basically in sight of each other, but barely. We went through a stock gate there, ranch gate, and drove 5 more miles up to an Adobe sheep hunters camp that was to be our camp for the week of bear hunting. And Gary and I and Wade were going to stay in tents, but George and his uncle, Fat, they called him. Did you ever meet Fat?
I think I met him one time in bear camp.
He was a jewel too, just a great guy, an old cowboy, probably in his late 70s, maybe 80 by then. We walked in that sheep herder's hut that night, and here was Corky Hare. Did you ever meet Corky? He was a government hunter. And I
may or may not, but doesn't ring a bell. Though.
Yeah. But anyway, I'll get to the chase on this. He and George were sitting there chasing chilies and brown beans around a metal plate and sopping the juice up with a tortilla. And I said, man, I am in the West. I looked on the wall, and there was all their tack hanging, their bridles and ropes and everything. It was a dream for a kid,
It was a dream.
Guy from back east. It really was.
No, even with all my survival training and all that, just to be in the presence of Mr. George Hobbs and just kind of shadow him as he's looking for, lion scath and sign and tracking. It was just, it was something to really witness. And that was just an absolute pleasure.
Well, I can absolutely concur with what you're saying. We hunted in a place called Hell's Canyon or Hale Canyon. I don't remember which. But George was showing me all the, let's call them nuances of lion hunting and the difference, how to read the scrapes and which way the cat was traveling. And was it a tom or a female and all this. But along with all that was this humor and was this idea that here you're with a guy that could survive.
Oh, yeah.
He could survive in Death Valley, I think. This guy was an amazing, amazing guy. I wish all of our listeners could have had the opportunity to meet George Hobbs.
And George actually introduced me to, oh boy, the name came and went.
It'll be back. It happens to me all the time.
Randy Skaggs.
Oh, okay, yeah. Another
Randy
Air Force guy.
Yeah, Randy was stationed in the Air Force. He and it was just right before he was ready to retire. He was running the hospital out at Kirtland Air Force Base in the Kirtland Air Force Base Hospital / VA Center. And, Randy being famous for Skaggs black and tans and had some of the best, black and tans, still to this day, you still see, Skaggs Black Misty, Skaggs Queen, and, on some of the better black and tan, dogs. So,
absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned, Randy, and he was on top of his game there for many years with black and tans. He had some of the winningest black and tans, especially at female Misty, I remember. And there was another one. I think he had one, a male dog named Hammer, I think. But anyway, great hunter.
Yeah, he had some good ones. And then, he kept most of his coon hounds back either in Missouri or Kentucky. And then, the other ones that he would bear and lion hunt, cat hunt, he would have out there in New Mexico with him. But enjoyed a lot of good times with him.
Well, this coon hunting or hound fraternity is just such an amazing thing. And all the people that you meet, one of the last times I talked to him, perhaps in person, to George Hobbs, was at the Little Dixie Jamboree, a PKC hunt in McAllister, Oklahoma. And George, I believe, was sitting there at the table. I may be a little fuzzy on this. I know Dave Anderson was there. And I know for sure that John Wick was there. And John and Dave and I sat and had a long conversation.
Right.
And talking about dogs. And we talked a lot about trash running in dogs and how you can, John was kind of a little incredulous to think that when I told him that in the line of plots that I had, they basically bred pretty much trash free. And although you might dispute that, the first thing that old Hoss ever treed was a possum, if you remember out there.
I do.
Near that subdivision, which we're going to talk about some of that too. Yeah. But, Courtney, just think about the people we've been able to meet over the years and how interesting they were and how knowledgeable they were. And really, and I know from talking to you before, how revered they are now in our memory, What was it like to hunt with Dave Anderson? What kind of guy was he? On the surface, he was the most congenial, polite, soft-spoken guy that one could imagine, but I never actually hunted with Dave.
But Dave also had a very competitive spirit.
Oh, did
So
he?
if you drew Dave in a competition hunt, it was game on. And yeah. So no, but Dave was great. Dave had a great mind, and that from all his writings, very cerebral, and he put a story on paper. But Dave and I just had a really good friendship. Him and his wife, Gwen, were very close. And both Melina and I just enjoyed their company. We enjoyed getting together, going over to their place, taking the kids over. They were almost like grandparents to my kids. Or aunt and uncle. I shouldn't say grandparents because they really weren't that much older.
Right.
But Dave and I actually owned the money female there for a little bit, and I bred her to a dog that I had that went back to Stanley Roberts Sarahwood dogs back in Virginia. And when I say we're talking in the hills of Virginia, Honecker, I hope I pronounced that right.
Well, if
Honecker,
you're from there, listen, I can tell you, I know of which I speak. If you are a native of Southwest Virginia, that is Honecker.
And Sarahwood is actually, if you're looking at it on paper, it's Sourwood.
Yeah, but they call it
but
Sarahwood.
They all pronounced it Sarahwood, so I would, and honor of Stan, who's passed, it's always going to be Sarahwood hounds.
Well, that's just like the word, what they're saying, instead of sour, they're saying it's SERE. It's SERE. It's like SERE cherries. Yeah. Well, and
then you got and then you got this Yankee or Midwestern, guy pronounce it. But anyway, I met a young airman, Larry Maggard. This is going back when I was at McCord Air Force Base in Washington. And he was a third generation coon hunter. He was 18 years old, never, ever been out of the state of Virginia until he went to the Air Force. And everything that we did was like a first time for Larry because he was so sheltered from his Virginia upbringing. And he basically almost became like an older teenage son of mine. And, was a very, very good friend. But the good thing about Larry, he not only enjoyed coon hunting, but he enjoyed wrestling. And he wrestled at Grundy High School in Virginia, which is a really good, program, and wrestled for Kevin Dresser, who was an Iowa wrestler and now is the head coach at Iowa State University. So he had a very good pedigree as a wrestler and then wrestled for the Air Force. So Larry and I were very close and still very close, and just saw him last week and went out to dinner in Bristol, Virginia. And well,
let me jump in there just a minute. You mentioned Grundy, Virginia.
Grundy. My
grandfather, who was a Hatfield and a descendant of those famous feuding Hatfields
and McCoys.
and I've told the story on the podcast before, so I won't go into it. But my grandfather was for many years a coal miner, of course, from West Virginia. Well, actually, he was born in eastern Kentucky, but my mother and her siblings were raised in West Virginia up until she was in 11th grade, and they moved to a little town called Clinchco, Virginia, which is not all that far from the area you're talking about. And my grandfather owned or operated a watch repair shop in Grundy, Virginia. So it's a small world, Courtney.
Small world. Yes, it is. Yeah. Well, I ended up getting a dog sent from Virginia to Washington, and he was off of Riverbend or Sarahwood John Wayne, and off of Riverbend John Wayne
Yep.
offered, of course, the famous Hall of Fame Riverbend flag.
Yep.
And so he was flag bred, but he was, when we bred him to Money, Lone Pine Mad Money, Clover bred, we had this beautiful red head, blanket back looking flag and Clover. You cannot look at this dog that I named Big Bang and say that was a flag / Clover bred dog, because he was beautiful. And I ended up dual granding him when I was out in Albuquerque. And
and you called him what again, Courtney?
It was actually dual grand Sky Cries Big Bang was his actual title. Okay. And he was, he was a nice dog. I only bred him a couple times. Wish I would have bred him more. But Steve, a very good balanced dog, real good strike dog, could move a track like a dog should, excellent tree dog. He wasn't one of those, 120, 140 time bark, chop mouth tree dog, but he was just a good, solid 90 to, 100 and, but always had a coon, And that's, we don't see that anymore,
right. And
or it's harder and harder to come by.
Yes, sir. Well, what about the time frame that you spent there in New Mexico?
So I stayed at the pararescue school for 4 years, and had a great time. That was probably the highlight of my military career, training young PJs, to the elite of the Air Force and elite of the military, They really are outstanding individuals. So I got the best of both worlds, both SERE and pararescue. And then after 4 years of that, then I moved out to Missouri. I was ready to get back what I consider, back into the coon hunting hub, if you will, really. Because I've been on the outskirts of it for so long. So when I was in Washington, I would have to go to Montana, Oregon, or California for UKC hunts if it wasn't one of our little local event that we only had a couple times of the year. Sometimes I'd be traveling 13 hours one way just for a UKC event or an RQE or anything like that. I'll
interrupt you here. One time I was at the Labor Day Classic in North Vernon, Indiana, in my PKC years, and there's Travis Sterick there.
Yep.
And Travis has driven. Well. Yeah, I know you do. And he had driven out from Washington State to Indiana to go to a coon hunt. I'm like,
hardcore.
Oh man, think about it.
Yeah, that's a haul.
Yep.
That's a haul. When I was in Albuquerque, I went to John Rich's place in Arkansas to see Minkler's Kansas Thunder. I wanted to breed money, and I was on a stud dog, adventure journey, trying to find the, the ultimate stud dog for money to breed to. And I figured if I bred her to my own dog, which was the, Little John, the Sarah Wood John Wayne 2 dog that we called Little John, and I had success there, I have Big Bang. What if I bred her to one of these nationally bred stud dogs?
Right.
So I went out to John Rich's place, and John didn't talk about Thunder, and I got to see Thunder go, but John talked about Hickory Nut Harry, Balls Hickory Nut Harry. The entire night he wore me out about Harry. and Timothy Ball, about how great Timothy Ball is. And of course, as a boy in the magazines, reading all those Timothy Ball, you would read it for entertainment value, but you would never believe it. And I'm like, he's like, on your way home back to Albuquerque, stop at Timothy's. He's right on the way back. And I says, no, I no way. And he's like, no, trust me, it's not what you think. And long story short, I stopped at Timothy Ball's. I spent an evening talking to him. He looked at me and he offered me to stay in his bed, or a spare bedroom. And, he's in his pajamas. He's showing me videos of Harry. I'd already cleaned up Harry's shit. He put me to work right off the get-go, cleaning up Harry's, crap and all of his grand night females. And then he looked at me and said, young man, you didn't come out here to listen to an old man talk about his dogs. You want to go hunting, don't you? And sure enough, we loaded the dogs up and we went coon hunting. Now, I did not get to see Harry himself. He was 6 years old and already retired and living the good life.
Now, that was the old Harry dog, right?
That was not the original Harry.
No. Okay, so this was the Ball's stylish hickory nut Harry.
Yep, it sure was.
That's the dog that John
Rich trained and, grinded out, essentially.
Right.
So we went out hunting. I think we made 5 trees. My dog was the only one that made a coon, treed a coon that night. He had another big name stud dog. I'm not going to mention names or anything like that. That was probably the most impressive tree dog I've ever seen. Loud as can be, but slick as heck. And but Timothy Ball and I struck a friendship that I could call him up. I could stop by. He'd always take me out to lunch, take me out to steak breakfast, and I will remember. For those that always thought Timothy Ball was just a blowhard, he was just a sweet, good Christian man that just loved to,
Absolutely.
get a little attention for himself and his dogs.
He was the best. I think I just made a little comment to someone on social media about all this stuff that's going on social media with this one-on-one coon league and all this crazy stuff.
Yes.
And I said, these current day keyboard commandos and internet, kings and all could not hold a candle to Timothy Ball in his prime for creating hype and creating excitement about a dog. He was the best. I mean,
Steve,
he was absolutely the best.
Yes, absolutely. When I pulled up to Ada, Oklahoma, and saw, the sign, welcoming you to Ada, Oklahoma, I expected to see him and Hickory Nut Harry's picture on that sign. That's what I had expected.
Yeah. Well, sometime I may have on a podcast. It's crazy. I counted up the other day, and it was 100 and close to 200 podcasts that I've done now. And 3 years ago, I barely knew what a podcast was. But I had my Timothy Ball experience and got to hunt with him on a pleasure hunt at the Texas State Championship out of Fairfield, Texas. And he and Billy Lynn, which who was a partner back in the day,
Billy Lynn, David Fletcher,
of course, Johnny McClanahan, all those
legends.
Guys. But
Texas legends.
It was just a very enjoyable experience. Now, Tim had, because he put everything out there in the magazines, that made him susceptible to a lot of criticism from people.
Right, absolutely.
But he really was the real deal when it came to coon hunting. And there's so many stories. Maybe sometime I'll do and I'll have you back on them. We'll do an episode on Timothy Ball and some of the stories and everything that he told. But he was an absolute legend in our sport of coon hunting, and probably never be another one like him as far as a promoter of coon dogs.
Right. I've had a stud dog before. I've tried to do the promotion. I never was, I didn't have that type of personality or what it takes, a Timothy Ball or Kurt Ehring, but it takes work, and it's a talent, and it's something I admire. And I will always admire Mr. Ball.
I think he's the one that created the slogan, the tree dog that could milk the maple. Oh, man. That's good stuff, Court. Well, listen. Okay, so you spent those years in New Mexico. Then you moved to
New Mexico.
Then you went to Missouri. And what part of the state were you in out there?
I was in Warrensburg, so the Air Force Base, home of the B-2 bomber, Whiteman Air Force Base.
Okay.
I was the SERE guy, and we only had, so for all the B-2 pilots, they could not fly a mission until they, I was the second to the last person we were sending, bombers after 9/11 to Baghdad and Afghanistan and dropping JDAM bombs. I had to give the SERE brief in case, what would happen if they were shot down, what to do, what type of threats, ground threats, give them all that information and what to do, where to go, etc. And then the chaplain, and then off they flew their combat sorties. Back then, I think it was, close to 19 hours. We were setting, records for combats, the longest combat sorties. And so that was, the end of my career. It was a privilege that I got. But, I was a halo jumper. I was a test parachutist for the Air Force.
Explain what a halo jumper is, Courtney.
Halo is a high altitude, low opening. So that's when you see the guys jumping out the back of the cargo aircraft, whether it's a C-130, 141, C-17, and basically diving out like Superman and free falling, military free fall, all the way approximately to, 4,500 square feet, I'm doing it, but of course you can't see me, but you're taking your arms, crossing them in front of you and basically like bird wings, clearing the air. So the rest of the people that are jumping with you, they're all in their safe little zone. And then you pull your ripcord about 3,500 square feet.
And at what altitude?
High altitude, low opening. Sometimes, we would jump out with oxygen. Anything above 13,000 feet required oxygen. But I went back to do a halo jump back with my old squadron in Albuquerque, and I had a parachute mishap. And long story short, June 19th, 2001, I was doing a night halo jump, never saw the ground, zero illumination, came in 50% brake and just smacked the ground. And me and another guy, got hurt pretty bad. He was able to walk away. I had 17 PJs, paramedics that were right there on the scene taking care of me. I got a nice Black Hawk helicopter ride, medevac to Albuquerque. And anyway, my foot was all the way backwards, 150 degrees. And then I shattered my fibula in over 100 different pieces and spiral fractured. So when I woke up in the recovery room, the Air Force Lieutenant Colonel said, Sergeant Risk, we did everything we could, but there was just so many pieces. And that was just prior to September 11th. That was June 19th, 2001. So I, in a cast, leg completely up in the air, watch, the aircraft flying into our trade center and the Twin Towers. Then, the Pentagon and the missing aircraft, and watching this. And I absolutely knew after that second one that we were under a terrorist attack. So I was not able to have my operation, which was scheduled for September 20th, because of what happened on September 11th, because we're sending B-2s, on their combat sorties. So I couldn't have the required operation to fix what the lieutenant colonel couldn't do the first time. And
so you went right back to work in your.
Well, I went back to work. I had to.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the operation until November. So over, a couple months time, and they had to remove 3.5 inches of dead bone from my fibula. And so I was in a booty for about 2 years. I wasn't coon hunting a whole lot. Ended up, selling, my good dog. So, he was still young and needed to be put in the hunts and, and studded out if, whoever the new owner. So I sold him. When I started getting better, I came back from a deployment. I actually got to the point where I could, redeploy, went over to, I call it my stands trip. So I was in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and of course, Afghanistan. And I was there for 9 months, came back, and I had hunted with Tipper. And when I say Tipper, okay, I'm talking the famous dog that Jess Dickerson had.
I guided her one night on a PKC.
Nocturnal Tipper.
Yep.
And I hunted with her when she was about 18 months old.
Was Jess hunting her or was Rusty Jones hunting?
Krausen.
Okay. Ryan
Krausen was 16 years old. Big boy, big football player at the time. Me, him, and Lee Pinson, I believe, was the older gentleman on the cast. It was a Friday before Paul's Valley RQE. And I thought, let's go to this, Friday night UKC hunt. Since I'm coming all the way from Albuquerque, I'll go out there and hit that hunt before I go to the RQE and try to qualify. And I drew Tipper, and boy, did she put on a coon tree clinic. I think she had 675, we still had 45 minutes later. And then the three of us were holding onto a tree as a tornado, came by in the local area. And it was absolutely nuts. Anyway, survived that, hunted the RQE. The next day, didn't do any good, went back to Albuquerque. But on the way back, I called Jess. And that, was the beginning of my friendship with Jess. And I ordered a pup out of Freckles and Naylor. And I had to have whatever I saw out of Tipper, I had to have. And anyway, I never got that. Unfortunately, Freckles didn't have any more pups. But when I got to Missouri, I started hunting, some of Jess's older females, in between litters and stuff like that. And
so you had quite a close relationship with Jess.
Yes. Oh, no. Jess and I, there for a time frame, I was hunting with Steve Mackey for quite a bit. And then I was hunting with Jess after my deployment, hunting some of Jess's dogs. I was never a good handler. I would, never want to take one of Jess's dogs and put it in a night hunt or anything like that. But kept them up, kept them in shape and had some fun with them. And, good friendship between Jess and I. And still to this day, that's kind of the style of dog. I always wanted to go back to that Tipper line. And I ended up now forwarding, years later, still hunting dogs out of Skipper, which is Skipper and Tippers were litter mates.
Yep.
And, still have semen collected on an old dog that you used to hunt with, High Plains Drifter.
Yep.
So Grand Night, Grand Show champion, High Plains Drifter. And it's probably, one of the loudest and most, enjoyable dogs that I ever had. Even though he had a ball mouth tree dog, I always thought I'd hate that until I had him. No one else had that. And he was so easy to tree.
Right.
And you can just call him on that locate. So One of my favorite dogs.
Well, I'll pause right here just a minute. There's an old mountain saying that we should give our flowers while the person's living. A shout out to Jess Dickerson. I never had a conversation with Jess over these years, many years. And when he had Naylor and he had that, what was the Jet dog he had?
The Jet, I hunted with Jet more than any of the other dogs. I hunted with X Junior. I was actually with Jess and Russ Myers, when they won the World Hunt in Palmyra, Missouri. I think that was the 2002 World Hunt, if I remember correctly. It may have been 2001, but I was right there. Here's an interesting. I was on crutches with them. Mark Houck, a blue tick guy, comes up to me.
And we started talking. Guy.
And he goes, "What the heck happened to you?" And I said, a night halo jump. And Mark lifted up his left leg, pants, pulled down his socks, and had the same scar at the exact same location and said, "Night halo jump." We both had a similar accident.
Wow, that's well, two things come to mind. First, that is really, and Mark's a great guy. I just talked to Mark at Autumn Oaks, I believe it was, last year at the motel. We had a little, reunion there and talked about old times. And blue tick guy, but very passionate guy for his blue ticks, and a great patriot, and a guy that I like a lot. But back to just a minute to Jess. I never had a conversation with Jess that wasn't an absolute pleasurable experience. The last time I talked to him just eye to eye was at the 2021 Tournament of Champions in Greencastle. And we talked outside the building there for quite a while. Always had a lot of respect for Jess. I was, as I said, I've guided him when he was on a cast. I've seen him as a competitor. Actually, there was a question on that cast that night, and when it came back to the panel, they finally, I know the guide is just kind of like a spectator, but I guess the club wanted to know what I thought about what was going on. And I just said, well, Mr. Dickerson there laid it out to you exactly the way I saw it. And that's all I can say about it.
Yep.
But anyway,
facts.
I do have a lot of respect for Jess and for Russ Meyer. You mentioned him. And these are some class people in the sport of coon hunting. Another guy that I owe a phone call to, and I need to get back to him, that I used to talk to a lot, is the young kid that hunted tipper for Russ, was Rusty Jones. And did you ever meet Rusty?
I think I drew Rusty one time on a little local PKC hunt just outside of Clinton. If my memory is correct, he was hunting the Mike Tyson dog. In a 1 hour hunt. He had 950 plus. I had 925 plus.
Oh my goodness, you guys were in them.
It was absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
It was just a coon treeing clinic, split tree back and forth. The coons were just moving that night. And it's a hunt that I'll always remember.
Oh, yeah. Well, birds of the feather, flock together, they say. And that whole group right there, I really have a lot of respect and admiration for them. And the guys that got to go out to those Russ Meyer invitationals just always said that was just the best time that they'd ever had coon hunting, So kind of wished, of course, I wasn't in the heat of, I wasn't competition hunting at that time, but
Russ took care of the crew. If you traveled to come up there, he treated you like you were first class.
Oh, yeah.
And, just an amazing person, an amazing place to go visit, Yeah. But those memories will, last forever for me.
Absolutely. Well, okay. So now let's transition. You said this was like 2001.
That was 2001 when I had the parachute accident.
Yeah, well, see, it was 2004 in November that I went to work at AKC, and actually was living in a it's like a hotel, but it's like a suites type thing there in Raleigh, and then moved into an apartment. I think.
So you missed the New York AKC.
Right. See, New York.
You came when they moved to Raleigh.
Yeah, New York AKC was experiencing problems hiring people, bringing them into New York City. It was expensive, all the things you can imagine.
Imagine, yes.
And especially somebody involved with the coon hunting program. So when they decided they wanted to get back into coon hunting and approached me about doing that job, and finally did say I do in November of 2004 is when I moved down there, and then didn't move the family down until like April, I believe. But that would have been like in 2005 when you. How did that happen? You gave me a call, didn't you, Courtney?
Well, I retired out of the Air Force 2003, moved back to Washington State, Spokane area, had a really nice female that was, that I really, really liked. But I wasn't able to coon hunt. And Eastern Washington, unlike Western Washington, had some coon, but I mean, it was not good. And they had in 1996, one of the reasons I moved away from there, they did away with all the bear hunting, lion hunting, for, the big game folks. You guys remember Initiative 655. So you couldn't do that. And so the coon hunting wasn't that great. I had shipped my dogs or sold them, to friends back in Iowa, gave them buddy deals. But my goal, my objective was to get, back into the coon hunting world. And the opportunity for Fort Bragg opened up. And I was able to take my same job that I was doing as a government contractor in the SERE world and come out here to start up a program at Fort Bragg. So did that in 2006. And that's when you and I first got together. It was 2006.
Okay. Well, I know my world was kind of in a whirlwind at that time with starting this new program with AKC and all that involvement, but was really glad, to be able to get out, because I really, at first I met, I knew Pete Holt, from
Superman.
PKC.
Absolutely. Another legend.
A legend for sure. When I was at PKC, the first time I went to the World Hunt in Aurora, PKC assigned me to room with Pete, and we shared a cabin there at Ken Oaks, just outside of the park. And what a jewel of a guy. And of course, you and I hunted with Pete in North Carolina too. And Pete is just a great guy, and he went through some tragedy in his life since we were there, Courtney, with losing his daughter in an automobile accident. But Pete was just one of those really special guys, and I knew Pete, and Pete was keeping my female there when you and I got together.
Right. Yep. Yeah. That is correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
old Kelly.
Kelly, Stone Stylish Kelly.
I know where we're moving to.
Yeah. Well, that kind of, we kind of have a little story about her too. But Kelly was a dog I enjoyed very much, and I'd bought her after Silver Dottle Stone won the PKC World Hunt, and Mill Creek Molly had been the national leader that year, and she became the all-time money leader at that time in PKC. So had a lot of fun with Kelly, and you and I hunted. Pete kept her and hunted her some.
Yep.
And when I was working like that and kind of didn't have a place to keep a dog, I had to depend on friends, and man, they can be so important at those kind of times.
Yes, absolutely.
And just a big shout out to Pete. And Pete was kind of a big friend of Buck Monroe. and those, Buck's dogs,
Right.
Kojak, and what was the other stud
Southern
dog?
Sound dogs.
Sound Kennels, yeah.
Yep.
I think Buck was kind of over around Rocky Mount or somewhere over that way, maybe.
You know what? When I came to Halo School in '96, I actually tried to. I think it was Whiteville, if I remember.
Yeah,
correctly.
that's right. I think.
And I drove down there to go see whether I could just, run into them, or I had no phone number or no nothing. And, but I drove through that area, and then I think I went down to, Darlington, South Carolina. I think they were doing an RQE down there, and went and hunted, or not hunted, but just fellowshipped with some of the South Carolina, North Carolina coon hunters down there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There's the thing I remember most about North Carolina was as I was with AKC and trying to enlist clubs to hold AKC events all through that state, I would travel on their meeting nights. Man, those people feed. Man, they put on the feed bag when it's club meeting night. I can't remember the really nice guy down at Rockingham down there at that club. And his name just won't come to me right now. But
you had Lee Crisco.
That's him.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, you hit
He's
him.
still there.
First
black
shot.
And tan guy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was.
And Ben Moss is there, and now it's Representative Ben Moss, North Carolina representative.
Well, that's
so
awesome.
Yes, and he's doing some good things, for us and the houndsmen and some of the battles that the hound people have to deal with, unfortunately, legislation-wise.
Well, there's a number of things that I remember from. Well, the one thing that amazes me, Courtney, is you say this was in 2001 when you had this, injury, and here it is. It's barely 5 years, if that, and you were doing good in the woods, man. Yeah.
Eight operations. They had to basically go into my hip, do pull out bone marrow, put it down into my fibula, regenerate bone growth, and it worked. I had a great doctor out of Warrensburg, Missouri, that did a phenomenal job. I used to coach his son in wrestling, and he took care of me. So, there's that wrestling coon hunting thing coming all back together.
It's all intertwined, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, listen, you've had some pretty good success. I know I was always impressed with you as knowing a guy that knew Walker pedigrees and studied them. I always looked at you as a real student of the breed. You were on top of what was going on around the coonhound world, always, it seemed to me, especially with the Walker dogs and all. What, as a breeder, what's kind of been your philosophy through the years of breeding dogs, Court?
I want the complete dog. I want since I've, been involved with the shows and confirmation, I've always loved a dual purpose. It doesn't have to be that way. Trust me, I've had some of the ugliest, fugly dogs that you can possibly imagine. I love a whitey dog, Clover, and you might have a white face, calico ear, but to me, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But I want a dog that's coon dog through and through out. The entire lineage is very important. So, if I am looking for a dog to breed to, I really believe it's not just that stud dog, but it's that bitch. It's that mama dog and how she's bred. And I want a family of coon dogs all the way through when I'm looking for, that right stud or, that right cross to make with my bitch.
Well, I think you've been fairly well connected.
Fairly. I wouldn't say, I've had, tremendous success, but I've been fairly good at it.
Well, I know you're pretty heavily invested back in some of those Iowa dogs.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, when I was in Missouri and hunting some dogs for Jess, I went up to, well, actually, it goes back to Albuquerque. I from Troy Ferrari, and still, ironically, I am still hunting a Troy Ferrari dog right now. So my main female, my personal female, goes back to Troy stuff. And so going all the way back to roughly probably 1999, I got a female, or actually a male dog from Troy that was off of, let's see, Wessel's Wild
Casey.
Wessel's Wild Casey and his famous Chick female.
Right.
So Ferrari's Chick. And Chick was out of the famous Iowa Trump dog.
Right. It was in the World Hunt in the Final Four the year that
Chick
Mike Carmack won it out in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Right.
Yeah.
But Don Sawyer out of Fort Dodge, Iowa, had the Trump dog 5 years in a row at the UKC World Hunt, placed fifth, never lost a cast that year, just didn't make the Final Four.
Right.
And,
that's right.
With today's format, he may have been the world champion. But so you had Troy Ferrari that had the Chick female, and you had Travis Adrian that had the Roxy female. Chick and Roxy were sisters. They were both out of Iowa Trump and Bear's American Yuki, Russ Bear's Yuki female. And that was a famous cross and really produced, great females that really reproduced really well. And in fact, Roxy herself reproduced a world champion, ACHA Cheeks Hack, Doug Cheeks' hack dog. That you remember Doug Cheek, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So
Doug was always, let me interrupt there and throw another bouquet of flowers. Doug Cheek and Mike Copeland, I believe it was Copeland, in Columbia City, Indiana, were always team judges when we had the World Hunt up in those years. Those were back in the Pac-Man, Beaver Lake Magic years, Great guy, great judge. They did a really good job judging for me year after year. So just throw a little shout out to my old buddy, Doug Cheek. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, the old Iowa Trump dog goes back to Paul Gregg stuff and John Wick stuff. So, went back, to that original banjo breeding, Gregg Stylish Banjo. And so we're real strong in that, but they also had that Preacher. And,
that's what I was going to say. Trump
dog
looked
was
like
Preacher colored.
Yes.
Yep. And the Roxy female, she was Trump colored. So back in Missouri, I ended up getting a female. And I got her from Travis Adrian. She was out of his old Buckeye dog, and a bitch that he was off of Stylish Harry and Roxy by the name of Heidi. And extremely easy, started at 5 months old. Cordell trained her when I was off in Afghanistan. And long story short, she ended up placing 19th in the 2008 UKC World Hunt. And she was a really, really nice dog. Well, I named her Iowa Style. And that, kind of going back off the Iowa Trump. But it's also kind of a wrestling spin off of Dan Gable. Dan Gable, style of Iowa wrestlers when they won 19 national championships. They call that, and still today, the Iowa Style. So anytime I had a dog from the Iowa area where it was bred, with that, lineage, I always called it Iowa Style.
Yeah.
So I took Kelly to get her bred. I called Al Nunneman. Yep. So back to your old Kelly female. I was living in North Carolina. I had Kelly. Let me have her for a while. And I took her to get, Al Nunneman said, make an uncle niece cross. So breed her to Mr. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And two-time world champion, Mr. Smith. I think, you were working at AKC. He was an AKC world champion.
2 times.
And I went and hunted with Mr. Smith and absolutely was blown away, with his coon treating ability.
I think he's one of the most underrated dogs in history of
Absolutely.
coonhound sport. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, at that time, there was a dog that the guy that was actually had Mr. Smith, it was Josh Coles. Remember Darius and Josh Coles out of Nebraska. So
they
Josh
bought the dog later on.
Yes. They and I'm not going to go into detail, but there was some money. They were going out and buying all these, big name stud dogs. And they had this dog that they were wanting to sell by a name of Drifter that Josh had been hunting. And brother Darius said, nope, he's not going to fit our, breeding program. He's not a big enough name. So they just bought 2-time world champion, Mr. Smith.
Right.
And but Josh was literally in tears. Now, Josh was a linebacker for Nebraska University when they won 2 national championships, played for Dr. Tom Osborne. He was a big guy. And to see him almost in tears talking about this dog. But it was out of a cross that I'd been wanting so bad for years. And guess what it went back to? Jess Dickerson, skipper dog, which is littermate to Tipper.
Right.
So, anyway, long story short, I ended up tracking that dog after it left Nebraska, went to Ohio, and to Larry Weaver's place. They had worked out a trade, and old Drifter was there. I called Larry and worked a deal to guest stud him on out. And I was absolutely in love with that pedigree and how he was bred, and I knew that he was going to reproduce. So, and that's about some of the same time that you and I were hunting, towards the tail end, I believe.
Yep, for sure. Another shout out there, Larry Weaver, a name you bring up, one of the true class gentlemen in the sport.
Yes, he was.
Yep.
And,
enjoyed a real, Lindell Price and I enjoyed a really nice post-Thanksgiving hunt there when I was living in Raleigh. We went up and hunted with Larry and Nathan, his son. His son, Nathan, is now a bullfighter.
As a bullfighter,
like Shorty Gorham and that kind of thing, rodeo. They used to call them rodeo clowns way back, but I thought, man, who that boy? he likes to play it close. I see, but anyway, just great folks. I'm just reminded.
Absolutely,
I've been so blessed, Courtney, down through the years with so many great acquaintances and friends and. Well, so Drifter. Now, Drifter was the dog that you were just high as the sky on when I left
I was
Raleigh.
high, yes.
Tell me about him.
Well, it's High Plains Drifter. Drifter being directly off of Nocturnal Skipper and the Unforgiven page. Had brothers that were Grand Knights, had sisters that were Grand Knights. His entire lineage was just a family of coon dogs, and went back to the old the Iowa Roxy that Travis Adrian had, and so everything kind of came together with stuff that I've always had. And believe it or not, Drifter was raised a portion in Warrensburg, Missouri, where I had lived previously. And he was raised by a young man, Zach McBee. For those that, current in the coon hunting world, all know Zach McBee is probably one of the hottest trainers, breeders in the country right now, and handlers. And so even when Zach was a teenager, high school boy, he raised and trained, this top dog, made him Grand Night champion, made him a PKC champion, was winning all around the Missouri and area. But when he went off to college, Zach, being a smart young man, went off to Central Missouri State University in Warrensburg. He decided to sell half of Drifter. And so, long story short, Drifter went from him to Ryan Houghton to the Cole brothers out in Nebraska to Larry Weaver in Ohio, and then to me in North Carolina. And I just saw this gem, that's being passed up in the breeding world with that pedigree that he comes back to. So I started doing a little bit of breeding with him and ran him as a stud dog. We didn't breed. I mean, I still don't think he has 100 puppies, but we're well over 10% night champions and grand nights. So he did really reproduce really well. A dear friend of, I think, both of ours, and you probably knew his father, Paul Ryder, but Daryl Ryder sent a grand night female that was Brett Myers bred out of the old half-breed Jessie female by the name of Half-Breed Joey. And Half-Breed Joey was bred to Drifter and reproduced a really nice male dog that I still have in my pen today, who's going to be 10 years old next month. And his name is Belly Buster. So half-breed Belly Buster. So Buster, I've always had dual grands. I told you I like a dual purpose. But once, Buster retired at an early age from the hunts, because of, our favorite thing, Lyme disease and thyroid. It became a mess there. And he was sterile on top of it. So he's just living the good life here in North Carolina and Southern Pines. But I also started water racing him, and he ended up winning the North Carolina State Water Race a couple of years in a row. Took second in the AKC World Water Race. So he is a swimming fool.
That's cool. Well, we got a plot dog over there up and coming that really loves to churn that water. So maybe we get a chance to compare them sometime. Courtney, this has been an awesome conversation. We've been at it about an hour and 45 minutes already. But there's just so much to talk about, and I definitely want to get you back on the program.
Absolutely.
But, you went through another health challenge here recently. Tell me about that.
Well, 1997, I told you I was a test parachutist for the military, and I had a few bad landings, as everybody. And it's not a matter of if you get hurt, it's a matter of when and how bad. So, but in 1997, I was sent down to San Antonio to have back surgery. And long story short, never had it. And I was able to put it off for 30 plus years. And, but it got to the point where I just couldn't deal with it anymore. So last year, June 1st and June 3rd, I had back-to-back back surgery. I had the big decompression fusion, in the hospital for 8 days. And, I have not been in the woods for a long time. So I kind of feel like I'm hanging on, in the coon hound world by a thread right now. But I'm hoping to get back in there. I'm hoping to get my feet back under, but I'm having some nerve issues. And, I don't have any regrets. I would do my military career all over again, but, older we get, sometimes we have to deal with new challenges. And that's kind of my new challenge, is dealing with my back. And so going up to Duke here, about 2 hours, and having another epidural nerve block shot in my back under a CAT scan. And that's about the 5th time I've had that procedure. So we're still working it.
Well, you strike another chord with me when you say Duke, and I tell people all the time those people saved my life. That was, when I was in Raleigh and I had the heart issue out coon hunting, of course, with Kelly, the female we mentioned,
with Kelly, yes,
and had those old chest pains, and ended up doing a double bypass there at Duke University. Dr. Peter Smith, who was the head of the thoracic surgery there, and they just treated me great, and I'm still kicking. That was 2006, and look here, man, that's about 18 years ago, or 16 years ago or so. So anyway, best of luck to you, Courtney, and
I've absolutely enjoyed this.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did, and I wanted to just briefly, I know we lost our dear Melina, and cancer, such a terrible thing. But you have a new lady in your life, Melissa, right?
Melissa, absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about Melissa.
A dog lover, but, after after losing Melina, which was, the love of my life, raised 7 kids, 11 grandkids together. You've been to, some of the bigger shows and hunts, you saw me, you probably saw her on my side. And it's the same way with Melissa. It's like Melissa just kind of took right on over. Melissa is a dog mama, very neurotic dog mama, very, very protective. Yeah. And she's got, a Walker hound that's, the biggest hound I've ever owned. He's 92 pounds, just, beautiful dog. And she's got him in obedience class and gotten him sitting and laying and, walking,
Yeah, well, that's great.
I mean, perfect. Like, almost like a border collie.
Well, God knows our hearts, and he knows what we need, and he brings people into our lives. And I could sit here and talk an hour about Ella and what a tremendous asset she's been to my life. And she's a dog person too. I mean, she tolerates the coon hounds, but right now her love is a little miniature dachshund named Louie. And so anyway, I had to go all the way up to Greencastle, Indiana, and get Louie at Christmas time. But
right.
But yeah.
So, I feel blessed, Steve, and I appreciate you bringing up Melina. I know you were there. And had a great relationship with Melina.
Absolutely.
You were there for me, during her passing, and
well, you guys were there for me.
That.
Yeah, you guys were there for me. When I made the move to Florida from North Carolina, and
that's
all
what friends
that.
do.
But Courtney, I'll say this real briefly and all, because I don't want to choke up here. But outside of my own family, I don't know that I ever met a more delightful person in my life than Melina. So we'll cherish her memory forever. And I know you so much more than I even. But Courtney, it's been delightful to have you on, buddy. I mean, this has been a great conversation, and I know we could talk for hours. But we'll push the button here to stop this thing just in a second. But thank you so much. I'll be monitoring your progress there. You got too much invested in, and I know you love it too much to get out of coon hunting already. I hope that these procedures, do what they're supposed to do for you. And just wish you the best. If I get back up to Carolina, I'll definitely look you up. Like I said, we got this plop pup over at our mutual friend Mark Miller's over there in Taylorsville. So if I get up that far to hunt this fall, I'll look you up.
I know Mark's got a spare room for me that I stay in, and I got a spare room for him to stay in, and I got a spare room for you and Ella to stay in. So if you do get up this way, we would love to have you.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much, and we'll try our best to do that. And that same thing goes back at you, fella, when you find your way down here to the beaches of West Florida, or actually Central West Florida. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this week of Gone to the Dogs. And, if somebody should ask you, where's Old Fielder, what's he doing these days? Just tell him he's gone to the dogs.